Bloomberg Audio Studios. Podcasts, radio, news.
This is the Bloomberg Daybreak Europe podcast. Good morning. It's Tuesday, the 29th of July. I'm Caroline Hepker in London.
And I'm Stephen Carroll in Brussels. Coming up today, at least 5 people are dead, including the gunman, after a shooting at a New York City office tower that houses firms including Blackstone and KPMG.
EU industries and politicians voiced dissatisfaction with the 15% US tariff deal as leaders on both sides rushed to finalise the details.
Plus dollar drift, global shift. Why the greenback's waning appeal is prompting investors to take a fresh look at emerging markets.
Let's start with a roundup of our top stories.
A gunman has killed at least 4 people and himself at a New York City office tower that houses firms including Blackstone and KPMG. Authorities identified the man as 27-year-old Shane Tamura from Nevada. His body was found on the 33rd floor, which is occupied by the real estate firm Rudin. Blackstone staff, who work 1 floor below, pushed furniture in front of doors to barricade themselves in during the attack. New York Police Commissioner Jessica Tisch says investigators are now working to understand a motive.
According to our law enforcement partners in Las Vegas, Mr. Tamura has a documented mental health history. His motives are still under investigation, and we are working to understand why he targeted this particular location.
Jessica Tisch speaking after the attack set off a chaotic scene in Midtown Manhattan, with firms located nearby, including Jeffries and Citadel, going into lockdown.
In trade news, a growing chorus of critics have taken aim at the deal the EU struck with President Trump for a 15% tariff on most of its exports to the US. Clemens Fuest, president of Germany's IFO Institute for Economic Research, called the deal a humiliation. Germany's Chancellor Friedrich Merz, who initially welcomed the deal, warned the economy would suffer significant damage from the tariffs, whilst the French Prime Minister François Bayrou went further, saying that the bloc had opted for submission. But despite the critics, the EU's trade chief, Maros Sefcovic, has defended the deal.
If I were to sum up this EU-US agreement in one sentence, I would say it brings renewed stability and opens door to strategic collaboration. This is the result of a month of genuine and relentless efforts.
Maros Sefcovic was speaking as the EU and US are now seeking to agree a non-legally binding joint statement by Friday that will expand on the elements negotiated over the weekend. Once that statement is finalised, the US will begin lowering its tariffs on specific sectors.
Well, the US Commerce Secretary Howard Lutnick, meanwhile, says a further 90-day extension of a trade truce with China is a likely outcome of talks between the two countries in Stockholm. The current 90-day tariff cooling period between the US and China is due to end on the 12th of August. In an interview with Fox News, Lutnick said it could continue beyond that date.
They're talking right now, but the decision maker, of course, is President Trump. I'm sure the people who are speaking with China are going to go discuss with President Trump how he wants to play it. He's got an excellent relationship with President Xi, and I think we'll leave that to Donald Trump to decide how he wants to do it. Is that a likely outcome? Sure, it seems that way, but let's leave it to President Trump to decide.
US Commerce Secretary Howard Lutnick speaking to Fox News as negotiations continue on issues including duties tied to fentanyl trafficking and Chinese purchases of sanctioned Russian and Iranian oil. Lutnick also said a delegation from South Korea flew to Scotland to meet Donald Trump, aiming to strike a deal while he's on a trip there.
Russian President Vladimir Putin is facing further pressure to agree a truce with Ukraine after President Trump announced a new deadline of 10 or 12 days to end the war. During talks with UK Prime Minister Keir Starmer in Scotland, Trump told reporters there's no reason to wait, suggesting Moscow could face potential economic consequences if it fails to bring the conflict to an end.
That I'm very disappointed. I'm disappointed in President Putin, very disappointed in him. So we're going to have to look, and I'm going to reduce that 50 days that I gave him to a lesser number because I think I already know the answer what's going to happen.
President Trump had initially threatened a 50-day deadline for Russia to end hostilities against Ukraine in mid-July. Vladimir Putin stepped up missile and drone attacks on Ukrainian cities afterwards. The Kremlin hasn't commented publicly on Trump's new deadline, though Russia's ruble sank to its lowest level since mid-May following the announcement.
UK food inflation is at its highest in 17 months due to rising prices for products like tea and meat. According to the British Retail Consortium, food bills climbed by 4% in July compared with a year earlier, the fastest increase since February 2024. Retailers are blaming the government's increase in the minimum wage and higher payroll taxes for the jump, while the BRC also attributed the changes to tighter global supplies. The data confirmed that a period of falling prices in shops has come to an end. Overall shop prices were up for a second month in a row.
A group of economists is urging the British Prime Minister to implement a wealth tax on assets over £10 million. Their calls come as the government looks for ways to shore up the fragile public finances in the UK. But the Business and Trade Secretary Jonathan Reynolds recently dismissed the idea as, quote, daft. Bloomberg's Tiwa Adebayo has more.
Chancellor Rachel Reeves is potentially facing a fiscal hole as large as £30 billion ahead of her autumn budget. The answer to her economic woes? A wealth tax, according to 30 largely left-leaning economists. The group, which includes the likes of prominent figures including Jayati Ghosh and Harjun Chang, say the levy could raise enormous sums of money. Critics of the claim say the move risks dampening entrepreneurship and triggering an exodus of the rich. Opinion polls suggest Brits are supportive of wealth taxes. In London, Tiwa Adebayo, Bloomberg Radio.
And those are your top stories on the markets today. The MSCI Irish Pacific Index down 0.8%. Eurostoxx 50 futures are 0.2 higher, but the dollar is holding on to its strength yesterday, trading flat on the Bloomberg Dollar Spot Index, and the euro's at 115.85, the pound at 133.48 against the dollar. The 10-year Treasury yield this morning down a basis point at 4.4%, as we are watching gold prices as well, up slightly on the day, $3,316 a troy ounce.
Now, in a moment, we'll bring you our reporting on how the dollar's waning appeal for investors is sparking a revival in emerging markets. And we'll also discuss the variety of robots at China's annual AI conference.
But first, let's bring you the latest on that shooting in New York City where a gunman killed 4 people and shot himself at an office building in Midtown Manhattan. Our national security reporter Miles Miller was at the press conference following the shooting. We spoke to him a little earlier and started by asking him about how the events unfolded.
Well, yes, the first calls came in just after 6:30. Police say surveillance video shows the gunman, identified as Shane Tamura of Las Vegas, stepping out of a black BMW parked along Park Avenue near 52nd Street. He's carrying a large M4-style rifle and enters the lobby of 345 Park Avenue, which is a high-rise that houses Blackstone, the NFL, and KPMG. He immediately opens fire, targeting an officer who was off-duty but working what's called a paid detail, so in uniform, doing security at this building. Then he shoots at a woman hiding behind a pillar and continues firing at civilians as he moves towards an elevator bank. Once he's at that elevator bank, he strikes another man, and then when a woman is coming out of the elevator, he does not shoot her, but rides the elevator up to the 33rd floor, which is the headquarters of a large real estate company here in New York, and walks the hallway firing rounds, shooting and killing another victim before turning the gun on himself.
We've heard from both the mayor of New York City and also the NYPD commissioner too. What do we know about the gunman's intentions?
Yeah, that's what's being investigated right now. What we know is that this suspect, who turned the gun on himself, had a concealed carry permit from Las Vegas, from Nevada, and we also know that he had a history of mental health issues. Now, we don't know if he had previously been arrested in any of those other jurisdictions, but we knew he drove across country to carry this out. Started off in Nevada, made his way through Colorado, Nebraska, Nebraska, and ultimately New Jersey before ending up right here in New York. We know that his motive is at this point not clear, but this is a building that housed some really important businesses. You're talking about Blackstone. You're talking about KPMG. We're talking about the NFL. So, motive is going to be very important to police officials, and they're going to be looking into that later today.
And those investigations continuing, as you mentioned. You mentioned some of the businesses in this office building in Manhattan. What do we know about what happened inside those offices while these events were unfolding?
The images we saw this evening were striking. You're talking about people who are working for, obviously one of the biggest firms, in finance, Blackstone, barricading themselves, pushing couches up against walls, against windows, against doors, because they did not know if they would be targeted by this. This is something that was on the minds of everybody who had heard the gunfire, who looked out the window and saw people running. But as you know, Park Avenue in New York is not just home to these groups that are in this building, but you've got Citadel down the street, you got BNY there as well. Of course, JP Morgan building their new building and their headquarters still there. So this was something that was going across WhatsApp groups and text threads, people trying to figure out if their loved ones, if their friends were injured. And luckily, as of this time right now, we know that many at the firms were not hurt, but we know that people who worked in that building were in fact injured, and some of them killed.
That's our senior national security reporter, Miles Miller, speaking to me a little earlier from New York.
Now, the global market turmoil provoked by US President Donald Trump's tariff announcements in April sparked a stampede out of the US dollar. Now, much of that money flowed into other developed economies, but billions have washed up in emerging countries, reviving markets that had fallen out of investor favour. Our emerging markets reporter, Selçuk Gökuluk, has been writing about this, and he joins us now for more. Good morning. Good to have you on the radio programme. How big has the movement then been into what had been, quite unloved emerging markets?
Yes, I mean, as you said, most of the money that is leaving United States actually went to so far, to Europe, Japan, and some other developed markets. But emerging markets are also benefiting. If you look at the stock markets, at least data shows, the reported, in terms of reported data, we have seen $13 billion in stocks, equity funds, and more than $30 billion coming to emerging market bond funds.
So what kind of assets then in these markets are investors being attracted to?
One clear actually winner is the local currency bonds, because as you can imagine, as the dollar weakens, that means assets in other currencies actually naturally gain. In addition to that, in addition to the currency gains, you have the high yields offered by local currency bonds. So emerging market actually, in general, emerging market local currency bonds have handed investors more than 10%. And at the same time, stock markets in general, in Eastern Europe, for example, Poland, Slovenia, Romania, all these markets returned almost 40% in dollar terms year to date, which is historic gains.
You and your colleagues spoke to some really interesting long-time emerging markets investors, who've been quite surprised by just the number and the volume of phone calls that they've been getting from investors, to try to get into this trade. What have they been talking about in terms of what it means for the countries where this money is flowing?
It's a very, very welcome development, because many emerging markets actually have huge spending needs. Again, in Eastern Europe, for example, they have large budget deficits in Poland, Romania, because of defense spending and because of immigration from Ukraine. And at the same time, many emerging markets have large current account deficits, like, for example, Turkey. They need foreign capital as well, foreign investments. And at the same time, even current account surplus countries like Saudi Saudi Arabia. They are trying to modernize their economies, and that's why they need international investment as well. That's why these flows are very welcome.
Does it look like a lasting trend at this moment?
It really depends on, of course, what's going to happen with U.S. policies. But at the same time, one thing is that Federal Reserve is expected to reduce interest rates, which usually supports risk assets, including emerging markets. And at the same time, we keep seeing new trade deals, agreements, and this removes one very important uncertainty from the market. And less uncertain times means, again, supporting risk assets, including emerging markets.
Okay, it's a really interesting story. Selçuk, thank you so much for bringing it to us. Selçuk Gökaluk there, who's been writing about how the stampede out of the dollar has actually meant a flow into emerging market assets and all of the traders who've been involved in that in the past few months. Thanks.
Well, just another story that we have been reading this morning that I wanted to mention to do with some of the robots on show at the AI conference in Shanghai. And an idea of what robots can do, well and badly. Boxing, backflipping, half marathons, reassuringly, some of them also fall down.
Yeah, they do. Look, this is a really great story. Not just reading about, I had to go, obviously, to look at some of the videos. And the most striking one, of course, is the ByteDance video of this kind of a big black robot with massive arms doing up a shirt and managing to kind of wipe tables and move things off of tables. So they, a little insight into maybe what humanoid robots might be able to do for us. It's still a long way off, though, something like 10 years. But China's very... I know. That's not that long. But China is really at the forefront of this and showcasing this week.
This is Bloomberg Daybreak Europe, your morning brief on the stories making news from London to Wall Street and beyond.
Look for us on your podcast feed every morning on Apple, Spotify and anywhere else you get your podcasts.
You can also listen live each morning on London DAB Radio, the Bloomberg Business app and Bloomberg.com.
Our flagship New York station is also available on your Amazon Alexa devices. Just say, Alexa, play Bloomberg 1130. I'm Caroline Hepker.
And I'm Stephen Carroll. Join us again tomorrow morning for all the news you need to start your day, right here on Bloomberg Daybreak Europe.